So there has been a lot of talk in recent years about whether or not it should be illegal to use the names or images of Native American peoples as mascots for U.S. sport teams, companies, and products. This has been covered widely by news outlets, but I'd like to focus on exactly why the use of these names and images is so damaging to both Native individuals and the perception of Native communities as a whole. To start off, before the arrival of Christopher Columbus to the Americas in 1492, there were an estimated 7 million to 10 million native peoples in North America. By the early 1900s, that had dropped by 95%. This is incredibly important to note and is often a skimmed over fact in this discussion. The images these companies are using as a marketing scheme are meant to represent a nation of people that were nearly erased from the earth by brutal European immigrants. Many of the 5% that did luckily survive that first 400 years were then forced into so-called boarding schools, which held slogans such as, "Kill the Indian in him, save the man." Students in these schools were taken from their families and often beaten, malnourished, poorly educated, and forced to do heavy labor. The aim now was to erase what was left of Native cultures in the U.S. In 1928, the Miriam Report came out revealing all of the atrocities occurring at these boarding schools. At this time, federally implemented civilization regulations were also still in effect, which confined Native people to reservations and outlawed many traditional practices. Just 5 years later, in 1933, George Preston Marshall decided to change the name of his NFL team to the Boston Redskins. I'm not exactly sure how Native Americans felt about this naming at the time, but I'm sure it didn't make them feel like they were being paid homage to in any way. Especially when you see that the term redskin was first coined in the 1800s by the U.S. government bounty announcements calling for the bloody scalps of Native Americans. Before this, two baseball teams had started the trend, being named the Boston Braves in 1912 and the Cleveland Indians in 1915. This would create an environment where fans and team mascots could dress up in cartoonish-style garb while cheering on their American baseball team, while the actual Native Americans were still being stripped of their traditions, cultures, and dignity. This would lead to the now 2,129 high school, college, pro, semi-pro, and amateur teams in 2013 having names that reference Native Americans at some level. Initially, these team names drew little resistance from American natives. This was partially due to their not having much of a say in the situation at the time, but also because until well into the 20th century, many natives didn't think of themselves as the term Indian. Many generally viewed themselves as belonging to a particular tribe and not having much at all linking them to other tribes. This mentality changed, ironically, due to the Indian boarding schools. Because the European Americans were attempting to strip away any sense of cultural Indianness they have from these children, there was an opposing unity created between all Native tribe members called Pan-Indian identity. With this unity, Native people have found a way to rise up and have their voice heard after this continued oppression, even in contemporary American society. But this fight is made more difficult by the American education system as well. The American education system historically depicts Native Americans as people of the past. As of 2014, 87% of American textbooks portrayed Native Americans as a population that existed only prior to 1900. They included no references to contemporary issues for Native populations, the ongoing effects over land and water rights, or the fight for sovereignty. New Mexico is the only state with a standardized textbook that even mentions the name of a single member of the American Indian movement. Only one state, Washington, uses the word genocide, which is the only word that appropriately represents the events that occurred. And only 4 states teach students about Indian boarding schools. With this level of miseducation in American society, the only images that young adults have of contemporary Native Americans are the ones on butter containers and sports memorabilia. This type of imagery is what is shaping the internal ideas of what an Native American not only looks like, but also their personality, demeanor, and culture. When a sports announcer discusses how the Cleveland Indians were aggressive in the 3rd inning, or how the Boston Redskins were weak on defense, this can subconsciously affect the mentality that viewers have towards Native Americans. When you name a team, group, or product after a certain nationality or culture, then the behaviors of that product will naturally affect the perception of the actual culture. This is amplified when a society already has very little knowledge of said culture. Any amount of new information or influence could sway the public's opinion. And as for those who see the Native American-based names of their favorite sports teams as something of American traditional value that shouldn't be changed, it might be wise to realize that the cultural identity of 5.4 million native people could have more traditional value than a football team.